Hi everybody, welcome to today's webcast, Renewables, Getting Started and Making Meaningful Progress. This webinar is brought to you by Second Nature in partnership with Altenex. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Medea. I'm Director of Education and Partnerships with Second Nature. Just a couple of logistics details before we get started. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording and the slides will be sent to all registrants in the days following the webinar. There will be a Q&A session at the end, and you can submit questions for the Q&A at any time using the questions function on your GoToWebinar panel. Next slide. We want to thank all of our partners for their support of Second Nature. Next slide. Since 2006, Second Nature has created and supported catalytic commitments from senior leadership in higher education to address pressing issues of global sustainability, of course. You know that this was the launch year of the American College University President's Climate Commitment, an initiative which ushered in an unprecedented era of transformative climate leadership in higher education. In 2014, Second Nature introduced the Alliance for Resilient Campuses to explore climate adaptation and resilience as a complement to the ACUPCC. With the launch of the climate leadership commitments last fall, Second Nature integrated and rebranded the ACUPCC and ARC as the Carbon Commitment and the Resilience Commitment. Together, these commitments constitute a new holistic climate commitment. Next slide. The growth of the Climate Leadership Network has created an infrastructure to scale solutions and innovate more rapidly, effectively, and efficiently than would happen without this shared alignment. To support and advance the work of the institutions within the network, Second Nature collaborates with organizations and firms at the leading edge of solutions and research. We're pleased that Altenex is a longtime partner of Second Nature, and of course, Chris O'Brien is familiar to our community from his great work at American University. Next slide. If anybody has any questions about Second Nature or the commitments, please do feel free to contact us. And I will turn the presentation over to Chris for introductions, and also remind you to please submit questions for this particular event throughout the session, and we'll take them at the end. Chris?
Thanks, Michelle. I just want to introduce the panel briefly, and we'll get right to it. First, I want to say thanks to Second Nature. Altenex is a business leader that supports Second Nature, and so I'm really happy to be able to work for an organization that supports this work, in part because I myself, my own career in sustainability in higher ed is due, at least in part, to the work of Second Nature. American University was a signatory to the ACUPCC, and if it wasn't for that, my job there as Director of Sustainability probably would not have been created when it was. So I want to just say thanks to Second Nature for doing all the work that they do to help lead higher ed on climate change. And it's my honor to be among a group of panelists who are those leaders themselves, and that who I have the opportunity to work with over the past couple of years on renewable energy projects. So we're going to turn it over to two panelists, some of whom you might know. Chip Chisholm is the Director of the Office of Sustainability at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and Sarah Zemanek is the Director of the Campus Sustainability Office at Cornell. Chip will talk to us about a solar project they're doing on campus, and Sarah will tell us all about their comprehensive renewable energy strategy up in Ithaca. So I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to Chip. So I think you can go to the next slide. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm at Howard University, and we're going to talk a little bit about our solar initiative on this in this Second Nature webinar. Again, we thank Second Nature for hosting this event. It's a pleasure to be a part of it. Next slide. Next. This is just my contact information. The previous slide was my contact information, so you can give me a call if you have any questions. So we'll talk a little bit about our endeavor to have solar on campus. Howard University is in Washington, D.C., and we're historically black colleges and universities. So we have endeavored for the last, I would say, 5 years to bring solar to the campus. We only have right now one little small array, which is solar thermal, which is located at the gymnasium. As the Office of Sustainability was formed about 6 years ago, one of my priorities was to bring solar to campus, obviously, and for a lot of reasons, it has not happened yet. We had some changing environment on campus where, you know, we had our leadership change quite often. And as you all know, if you're in higher ed, when that happens, priorities change, and therefore it can put a big halt on things you're trying to do. Solar was always one of my priorities. So the project goals that we have finally arrived at for this project was to, as you can see in front of you, help reduce fossil fuel dependency by catalyzing new renewable energy. That's paramount to my goal as Director of Office of Sustainability. However, it is not a goal of some people that are looking at the bottom line financially. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. The other goal was to reduce electricity costs. Of course, that's now you see what we're talking about here. That's a major concern of our CFO and other people on campus responsible, you know, for have fiscal responsibility on campus. We also want to increase utility budget certainty. Again, that's tied very closely to a CFO concern. You know, if you have the right instrument when you enter into solar projects, you do have some stability in regards to that. Demonstrate sustainability leadership, that's one of mine, or a thing that we want to do, especially being among one of the top HBCUs in the country. We want to be a leader, especially in that group. We're blessed to be in Washington, D.C. and work closely with universities here. And so for that, you know, we're pretty proud. We want to make sure that we do our part to support the concerted effort of all the universities. And secondly, we wanted to have our project goals, which is to, well, the last one is the park and canopy amenities to protect cars and so on. That was just an added bonus that we experienced as a project goal. It wasn't an original objective, but it is one that we experienced next. And the strategy that we seek, I can tell you right now, the first strategy I seek was to get some help. You know, we pretty much have a small office here, as a lot of sustainability offices are, sustained mostly by, you know, volunteers, student interns. We have some special programs with DC to give them help. So I needed some help. 4 years ago, again, I learned quite a bit about solar energy and PPAs, but never had a chance to really put it into work. And I knew nothing about off-campus deals, so that was something that was a learning experience that we tried to get up to speed on. So as you can see, point number 2, we investigated a 2-phase approach. And the first one obviously was on-campus solar, which we thought would be a little easier to do. I think we started originally looking at off-campus, but then we kind of backed up and said, let's look at on-campus first. It could happen quicker. It could help support phase 2, which was the off-campus wind and solar. If we got some momentum going, I think we're learning that to be true. And the next, we want to learn from the success and examples of large renewables that other institutions have had. And so I think we successfully have done that. And just being late inherently, sometimes you learn from mistakes that others might make, or not necessarily mistakes, but their procedures. Sometimes we've learned that if they had to do it again, they would do something a little bit differently. So we've gained some knowledge and insight on that. And then the last strategy was to obtain campus buy-in. If you're in higher ed, you know that's very important. Most organizations, especially ours, maybe not all, but most of the institutions I talk to, they kind of work in silos. So trying to cross over into other silos and bring everybody together on the educational part, financial part, sustainability people, you name it. There's these different silos you have to gain acceptability for your project. Next. Okay. So again, the first thing we tackled was the on-site solar project. And we looked at a number of buildings. We have over 100 and some buildings on campus, and we have 3 campuses. So we looked at all of the rooftops available to that we could use. And obviously, there are a lot of prohibiting factors such as size, protrusions on the roof, equipment on the roof, age of the roof, different things that can prohibit you from having solar on campus. And we ended up identifying 5 locations that we see here. listed below. Two of them, the first two were parking lots, and it was one parking lot and two garage buildings that were located at a hospital. The next group were some rooftops that we identified, and that was our service center. And then we have a huge auditorium facility, Crampton Auditorium. And then there's our medical school, which is Numa Adams West. So these were the ones that we sent out with our RFP, some of which, by the way, were borderline. So we thought about not sending all of them out, but in the end, we ended up sending these 5 forward. Next slide. Okay. And these are just some of the criteria, our RFP criteria that we established. That may vary from university to university. I won't bother to go through them, but I'll just highlight them. Obviously, the qualifications and experience, we look for that, in any firm that we would select. The technical proposal, in other words, what they put together and how they were going to approach this project and that kind of thing, their past experience and all that is looked at. Next was the project cost. We gave some points for that because obviously that differs between providers as they look at different means for financing the project. Implementation plan and schedule is important, especially among higher ed facility. I guess you guys know that it's a different animal than dealing with just the private sector. So when somebody comes to the table and they understand that environment, that is a plus for doing any project on campus. Then lastly is the contract terms and conditions. They varied again between providers, and we look very closely at the opportunities there. Next slide. Okay. The RFP criteria, again, this is just following up on that. I won't, again, read all of this. But one of the things that I was mandated, again, I'm a sustainability guy, and I love things that going to save the earth and for our posterity and those type of things. That's what drives me. But I learned very quickly that that's not what drives the CFO and other people on campus. So I've been very fortunate that I've had to pick up and learn their language. And in most cases, I've found that most projects that I do, in fact, do please them because they do save money. So the project that we went after here, I had to demonstrate strong savings. And next, I had to showcase that the project would have flexible financing. And one of the strict requirements we had on this one is that we did not want to put any money out on this project. And I think we obtained that through vehicles that we'll talk about later. And then, of course, I mentioned that timing is earlier, that a partner that comes to the table and understands that building on a college campus is kind of unique in the fact that you have to make your project fit into certain requirements. You have all these events happening. You have moving targets in regards to accessibility for buildings and parking areas and all that. So the provider has to understand that, and then also they have to be able to take the financial crunch that might put upon their financial proposal. So they have to understand all of that. Next slide. So we interviewed a bunch of companies, about 8 or so, and so we'll just jump right into who we ended up selecting. I felt very fortunate that we got a partnership out of this, which was between the city, which is one of the biggest providers in the country, and a smaller company called Vote Energy, who just happened to be a Howard alum that went into business a few years ago and doing pretty good. And as it was ironic that when I first went into trying to secure solar on campus, these two companies were the ones that I was talking with. So it would almost seem like maybe it was fate that brought them together, but they did come back to the table and said, hey, we're going to do this together. And so there was a lot of merits in that combination. Next slide. And of course, net metering, I'm sure you guys understand what this is and it's, how you do business when you're trying to get solar on campus. And as you can see here, we consume about 150,000 kWh per year. So we're a relatively large, consumer. And we typically in the past have tried to hedge our costs by getting fixed prices for multi-year fixed prices, usually from 3 to 5 years. And then what we would do is when we have opportunities to do so, we would do what's called blend and extend to try to take advantage of any favorable costs that we might identify. Of course, solar is a little different. It gave us the opportunity to kind of enter into a long-term, or way longer than 5 years, out to 20 to 30 years, and kind of establish, these costs out for that length of time. Meters is a common method used in the solar industry in which to accomplish that. Next slide. In the end, we ended up with several scenarios of which power purchase agreement that we would take advantage of. And so this graph represents the one that we ended up selecting, which was the green line at the bottom shows it's slightly slanted. As you see, it's a 20-year length there, but it's slightly slanted upward, which means that the cost is escalating over the period of time. And the two dotted lines that you see above they represent the extreme high and extreme low case, and the solid line in the middle is the industry standard projection for the cost of energy during that period. You will notice that the first 3 years it seems pretty flat because we do have a contract in place for those 3 years, so that's pretty much flat for us. But beyond that time, we would be exposed to the market cost, and so therefore we use the projector to kind of see what the market is projected to do. In making that decision, we decided to go with the escalator because the escalator provided more savings up front, even over the course of the length of the term of the project. The savings was about the same with a flat rate, but if you're getting your money up front when it's a little more predictable in the first few years than it would be out 10 years, 16 years. So we just took advantage of the savings as quickly as we could. So that this represents what we ended up deciding. You on your university may decide otherwise for various reasons. Next slide. One of the things that we did, it was a little early in the game, but normally when the providers come on campus, they will give us some sketches, usually from Google Earth, of where the sites are and what the installations would look like on the sites. However, I'm trying to cross silos here and show lay people across campus what the project will look like. So we're fortunate to have a small division A&E services that's, I'm connected with them. We work for the same facilities management vice president. And so internally we produce these little drawings to just show all the people as we met with various departments across campus. We want to show and demonstrate what these would look like. So this just shows a rendering of the possible project at the law school parking lot. So these are canopies, which are, in my opinion, very aesthetically pleasing and provide a lot of other benefits besides just providing the solar energy that comes from them. Next slide. Again, this is just another perspective showing the law school that the cars will be able to park under them. They're shaded. Right now, it's a big, wide open lot, and a lot of the occupants of the building complain that their cars are really hot out there during the course of the day, as you could imagine. So these will lessen that, as well as the visual impact. Being at our law school, the students there are very, very environmentally involved. So we're feeling a big push from them and support from that school in regards to this project. Next slide. This is the second location. There's also a canopy installation, which is at our hospital parking lot. We have two parking structures adjacent to our hospitals, and these are on obviously the top floor. But this just shows a preliminary sketch of what that would look like. Next slide. Now these are the Google Map presentations that were part of the RFP proposals that the providers gave to us. These are pretty typical. As you all can imagine, I remember when I got it at my house, they gave me a very similar document. So it shows the layout, proposed layout is still kind of flexible right now, and the final contract may adjust accordingly once they get up on the roof, and things are not quite what they thought. It may change, but this is generally the idea of the location of the panels on the roof at our service center building. Next slide. Next slide. Hello? Can we get a next slide? Okay, there you go. Hospital parking decks, we just saw that earlier, but again, this is the Google view of that facility showing the locations of the panels on the rooftops. Next slide. And that's it. So if anybody has any questions, I guess we could let us know. Okay.
Unmuted.
To turn it over to the next panelist at this time.
Hi, thanks, Chip. This is Sarah Zamanek at Cornell. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of some of our strategies to get started, get our administration on board, and some of the various business models that we've tried, and also some of the challenges that we've run into and lessons learned. Next slide, please. One of the most important things that I've learned after trying and various successes and failures over the last few years is that it's just critically important to align our sustainability initiatives with the core mission of the university and to really understand what our institutional priorities are. We've even started talking about a fourth bottom line, so not only the people, planet, and profit that is the standard sustainability mantra, but we've also now added a fourth P, which is purpose, referring to our academic purpose. So we were intentionally work to involve our students and faculty and create what we refer to as a living lab on campus. Next slide, please. So with our great aspirations at Cornell of our academic and land-grant mission, of course, come great emissions. This is an example of a student contribution who calculated the amount of energy our buildings use for heating, cooling, and electricity and converted that into a volume of greenhouse gas emissions from each building. So it's a great tool to help people understand that it's what we're doing on campus and the energy that our buildings use, rather than just our energy plant that is creating the problem. And so it's important for all of us to be involved. Next slide, please. Okay, so I will also echo the sentiment of Chris and Chip with the importance of Second Nature's commitments. We signed it was the ACU-PCC in 2007 when we became a signatory, and that public commitment has really been instrumental in being able to carry through on our plans. So of course, being a signatory, we created a climate action plan in 2009, and then happily that was included in the 2010 University Strategic Plan. So having a good plan and having that incorporated and having it on the radar of the administration and our Board of Trustees has also been a critical part of really getting started. And we're currently working on, I think, the 5th iteration of our plan. It's definitely a living document. We work to include changes wrought by new technology, changes in the economy, culture, administration, as Chip mentioned. So next slide, please. So this is just an overview of our vision for having a carbon neutral campus, at least on the energy side. So we have sort of a main district energy loop on campus, and we're looking to integrate wind, water, and solar to supply our electricity. We already have our, what I hope is famous, source cooling facility that provides cooling for campus with about 86% less electricity than a conventional system. And at least in this climate, it's a little different down there at Howard University, where Chip is half of our non-transportation energy goes towards heating the campus. So sort of our big challenge at the moment is figuring out how we're going to do that without burning something. But I actually am going to focus on the electric side for the rest of my talk. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we are making plans to use wind, water, and solar to supply our electricity for campus. We've created a number of assumptions that we look at every time we do a new version of the plan. But we hope that we will providing our total annual energy with either on-campus, off-campus, most likely off-campus long-term power purchase agreements with end-of-contract options. We've been here for 150 years. These contracts are long, but they're not 150 years long, so we like to build in options to either purchase the asset or renew the contract. And again, this fourth bottom line, access to the data and facilities for research and teaching purposes. Those are some of our baseline assumptions. We have run into a number of challenges. Right now, at least where we are geographically, electricity is extremely cheap. It was actually negative last week on the wholesale market. So that's tough to compete with. On the renewable side, we also struggle a bit with our utilities and interconnecting our larger ground mount projects. Of course, we run into siting and land use conflicts, and then I'll talk a little bit more later about some of the accounting and legal and credit rating related considerations that I'm learning about. But that said, there's lots of opportunities too. We've been able to start valuing the green energy attributes in our financial analysis. That's sort of a new thing that we've been making some progress on. And then, of course, there's all kinds of exciting technological opportunities ahead of us. So, the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a little bit of a repeat of what Chip already talked about, and I'll talk through a couple of examples of how we've done this. But we too are using power purchase agreement models, wherein we use either the sort of the wholesale market or the retail utility kind of in between our project and us. And we also, and I think Chris will also explain a little bit more about how those works after I'm done talking. And we also, we look at energy prices. These help us figure out on a single bottom line basis, what is a logical PPA purchase price. But that's also a little bit of a challenge. This chart shows actual prices historically, which you can see are all over the place. One of my colleagues has been in this business for a long time, and his prices today are about where they were 30 years ago. So figure, right? But then if you look at the projections going forward, they show a steady rise. So are those to be believed? Who really knows? So it's challenging, to convince our administration that a fixed price over a very long time is always the best decision. But these are the best numbers that we have to work with. Next slide, please. Okay, want to say one more time, with those challenges, both economic, supporting our academic mission just really enhances the value proposition for the university. So our sort of mantra, and it's also part of the Second Nature commitments, is not only are we striving to achieve carbon neutrality on campus, but we're looking for the innovations with the curriculum integration and leadership through demonstrating what can be done on campus and helping to bring that out to the rest of the world. And I've also found that involving students and faculty to the extent practical is really a win-win. On my first example, on the next slide, please, we actually worked with a student group to help us do an assessment of the solar potential of all our campus rooftops. We have, they're not all big and beautiful buildings, but we probably have between 400 and 500 buildings and rooftops on campus. And so the students created a matrix for us of various attributes. We looked at 14 sort of broad attributes with random subcategories to help figure out, from either a shading standpoint or amount of viable roof space or even aesthetics. They give a numerical score for what we call the solar potential. We actually had them work with an external consultant and a little bit with our facilities engineering staff to make sure their results were going to be useful for us, but they generated a great matrix of about 20 rooftops that were ready to go now, and kind of laid out which other buildings would be good when the roofs were replaced, and that's been incredibly useful and probably saved me a substantial amount of money on consultant expenses. So through their efforts, we were able to do, just finished up a power purchase agreement pilot for putting rooftop solar on. We ended up putting solar on 2 roofs. We had about 90 kW between those 2. We did discover that the economics at sort of this relatively small scale were not very good. We did end up paying a little bit of capital upfront, although we were able to work with a new building project that had some project money donated and help them leverage the additional solar to get them some additional LEED points, put them into LEED Platinum territory. So that all worked out well for that reason. But I would say that probably the on-site options are more limited economically. We've also, the building code and fire codes in New York State are changing. It looks like they're going to really reduce the capacity, kW capacity on our rooftops. There's some challenges with the roof warranties. It's a little harder to coordinate with ongoing building operations. We actually got into a crunch here at the end of the year, and we're trying to get the panels onto the roof of one of our buildings during finals week, and discovered at the last minute that with the crane plan, we would have had to close a lab that needed to be open 24/7 to finish projects. So the poor guys ended up carrying the panels up 4 flights of stairs. But so it's just a little more coordination things going on there. And then the insurance requirements and the risk kind of goes up if you're in your core campus and up on a rooftop. So some lessons learned there. Next slide, please. Okay. We've also now built 2 larger ground mount projects, 2 megawatts each, and we have 3 more under contract that we hope to get built this summer. We also did an RFP process to select a vendor. It worked well. The partner, I'm not sure if Chip mentioned this, with a private developer, because they have the ability to bring in tax equity investors that can monetize the federal tax credit, which is, at least in our situation, funded about 1/3 of our project's capital cost. So altogether, these projects we think will provide about 5% of our campus work. The first one we built, I don't know if you can kind of make out at the bottom right corner a little separate set of blue panels down there. Those are a separate educational array. They're fenced separately. We have faculty members that have access to that, so we do a lot of tours. Folks can go in and get up close, check out the racking, look at the inverter. They're actually on a tilt system, and they are monitored separately. So they're available for folks to do physical experiments on as well. These larger projects we're able to do with 0 Cornell capital. We're not paying a premium for green power. We're not saving a ton of money, but we think that's a win-win. If we can get green power at grid parity, we think that's good. It also provides a little bit of edge effect. We know what these costs are going to be way out into the future, so we can budget for that. In the event electricity prices rise, it'll provide a little bit of a hedge against that. Electricity prices fall, well, below what our PPA rate is, we'll be saving a lot of money, at the other places where we buy electricity to cover the little bit of a loss here. So that's how the hedge works. These are challenging. Utility interconnections have just been really hard in New York. They take a long time to figure out. The rules are changing. The utilities aren't real excited to work with you. So we've had to do a lot of advocacy with our Public Service Commission and our Department of Public Service, but we're making progress. We found that sites that are appropriate, that have a good interconnection nearby, that isn't going to require a lot of investment, provide the mitigations that the utilities want, are few and far between. They're often, pieces of land that other folks are eyeing for other purposes. So it's a little bit of a challenge to get everyone agreed on an appropriate site. But our planning department actually has told me they look at these solar farms as kind of a land bank. Relative to other potential uses, it's fairly easy to take the solar panels and systems off if that needs to happen in the future. We also struggle with changing tariffs and how the electricity is valued as it feeds back into the grid. Municipal approvals. We've been the first project to come through in the 3 municipalities that we've had these permitted now, and they each have a little bit different take on things. We've had one municipality tell us they don't need to give us a permit at all, which doesn't really work from, we have a state environmental quality review law. And again, right now, our energy prices are so low that even with the subsidies and being able to monetize that federal tax credit, it's really hard. The economics are just really tough. And again, the internal approvals process, these were new business models. So you have to get a lot of folks in administration comfortable. We've also had some unexpected operation and maintenance challenges, a typical sort of rotational lawnmower things, throw rocks. So the folks doing the maintenance of the ground cover, we actually use sheep to eat the grass down. Makes all kinds of sense. It's been very effective. Saved our developer a lot of money and O&M costs. So I guess to the positive side to some of these challenges, you'll find unique and unexpected solutions. Next slide. Okay. So another business model that we've tried is a contract for differences. It's kind of like a PPA, but instead of going through your retail utility, these are done on the wholesale. In New York, it's called the ISO markets. These allow you to go a little bit bigger. You don't have the utility in the middle, which takes some of the complication out of things. They're a little more challenging from a legal and economic and accounting side of things. As you can see on my list, we've had to learn about Dodd-Frank requirements, some things having to do with accounting, potential impacts on credit rating, and as the projects get bigger, of course, there's more impact on the overall hedging strategy and risk tolerance of the institution. So it's important that you understand who all your stakeholders are and understand all the questions and having good communications with those folks to make sure everybody's comfortable. And last but not least, you need to ensure that whatever you're doing is compatible with your greenhouse gas accounting protocol. They're not all the same, and all these different contract structures aren't viewed differently. So you need to make sure if that's why you're taking these projects on, you're actually going to be able to claim the greenhouse gas reductions. And I think that's my last slide. So with that, I will turn it back to Chris.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So the reason I'm here and the reason I'm going to tell you about Altenex is that what these guys did at Howard and at Cornell, I did similar things at American University in Washington, D.C. We did PPAs for on-site solar PV, on-site solar thermal, and for off-site utility-scale solar, which we actually had planned on being wind, but turned out to be solar, and I could go into that on another webinar. But suffice to say, I was in the same shoes that these guys are in, and so because I faced a lot of the same challenges, but eventually succeeded, I just want to point out that before I even get into the slides here, and I'll probably curtail some of my slides just to stay on time, but a couple lessons that I want to point out already from these case studies and from my own experience is that first and foremost, the lesson to take away here is that it's doable, and it's doable in a variety of different ways, different technologies, different siting, on-site, off-site, different scale, different financing, different economic impacts, different greenhouse gas approaches, but ultimately it's doable. The challenge is that it's a little bit different everywhere. The feasibility is highly impacted by conditions within each organization that can be affected by your site or by your state rules or by your ability to access competitive suppliers. So So the good news is it's doable. The bad news is it's complicated and different everywhere. And that's why after doing it in a number of different ways myself, I decided the most rewarding thing I could do personally was to do more of that and share the lessons that I learned. And as Chip mentioned, there are lessons that I've learned. Some of the things I would do again, other things I would do differently. So I'm excited to say that for the last year, what I get to do 100% of my day every day is work with other peers in higher ed to formulate effective renewable energy strategies and help higher ed as a whole go to scale with renewables. With that, next slide, please. Oh, and also I just want to remind folks that you can submit questions through the GoToWebinar control panel. If you click on the questions tab, you can just submit a question there, and we're keeping a queue of those, and we'll read those out as soon as I'm done here. So Altenex is neither a renewable energy developer nor basically we're not in the supply chain. We're not a manufacturer or a developer or anything like that. We don't buy or sell projects or try to sell anything to any schools. All we do is advise, and we advise on behalf of the colleges and universities that we work with. So the main purpose of our role here is to level the playing field so that when developers are calling you, trying to explain their project to you, and you're getting different developers telling different stories about how their project can work for you, it can be very challenging to do an apples-to-apples comparison on your own. So our role is to help do that for you. We work in 4 phases. We help you develop your strategy. We identify tactics for realizing that strategy through both on-site and off-site projects. We then analyze the economics of specific projects, and we execute the final contracts. Next slide, please. In terms of strategy, this is where you just kind of ask yourself some questions. What are we trying to accomplish? Do we have sustainability goals that are driving this? Maybe your school is a signatory to the ACUPCC or the new climate leadership commitment, and that's driving some of your goals. Maybe you have a CFO who understands the benefit of reducing risk exposure to volatile energy prices in the future. Maybe you're looking for short-term or long-term cost savings on your energy and utility costs. Maybe you have an academic goal. Maybe there's a program that can benefit from research or education related to a project that you pursue. And finally, a fifth common driver is town-gown relations or community economic development, things that have to do with your local, state, or regional community. Next slide. There are a few different purchasing options for renewable energy. So when you're developing your strategy, it's important to understand the basic differences between these different products. The first is that you can own an asset yourself. You can purchase a wind turbine. You can purchase solar panels, and you can own them yourselves, put them on your site. The upside is that they're yours, so you can do whatever you want with them. The downside is that it requires a capital expense. It also makes it challenging to recognize all of the federal and, in some cases, state incentives that relate to taxes, because unless your school is a for-profit, these are taxes that you wouldn't be paying anyway. So it makes it difficult to realize. Direct ownership makes it difficult to realize the best project economics in many cases. The second strategy, and this is a strategy that I'll show you in a pie chart next, is the most common, is to simply buy RECs, renewable energy certificates. One REC is produced for every megawatt hour of renewable electricity that's produced in the U.S. And that can be applied in your greenhouse gas inventory to 1 megawatt hour of electricity that you purchase. And it is a net zero greenhouse gas impact. So, for every REC you own, it's like zeroing out the greenhouse gas emissions from 1 megawatt hour of purchased electricity. It's very easy to do. There are lots of competitive suppliers that can do it. The downside is that by definition, it's a net cost. It also means that you're not buying energy. You're not buying the commodity of energy itself. You're only buying the environmental attributes. Third, and this is less and less common these days, is a utility or competitive marketplace provided green power product. These again tend to be almost by definition a net cost. They're very short term, so pros and cons to that. Suffice to say, they tend to cost more. Finally, and this is the one that we'll focus on, a power purchase agreement requires no upfront cost, typically provides savings, can provide savings in the immediate term on day one, but almost always will provide savings over the term of the contract. Next slide. Just to give you a sense of the uptake of these different strategies, if you look at the pie chart on the right, this is a breakdown of the adoption of those strategies within higher ed. The blue section is unbundled RECs. The green, the kind of bright blue or turquoise 14% wedge is PPAs. And that's, again, where we're going to focus because this is emerging more so than other sectors. Higher ed is adopting PPAs as a preferred strategy. And if you look at the small amount of turquoise at the top of those bar charts, you'll see that it's been growing in the last few years, but it's been growing even more in higher ed. Next slide. So a PPA is an agreement, it's a contract between an electricity generator and an energy user. So it's a contract between the university and the owner of a renewable energy asset. In that agreement, you agree on the price. That's a price per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour of electricity. And you agree on the term of that price. Typical terms are 20 years, but this can range as low as 10 years or as much as 25 years. This is beneficial to a university because it provides price certainty over a long period of time. That's something that can't be achieved with conventional fossil fuel contracts. About the longest contract for conventional energy that you can get is 5 years. With PPAs, you can go 20, 25 years. So fixing your price for that long period of time can be very attractive. It also can save energy costs on energy because the commodity associated with a wind turbine or a solar panel is free. The sun shines and the wind blows and nobody charges for that. So unlike the fossil fuel industry where prices for coal and natural gas are volatile, spiking and dropping unpredictably, but rising over time, with renewables you can predict the cost over time because all the costs are upfront. So it's just a matter of spreading those costs out over a period of time and turning that cost into a rate for electricity, and that's a PPA. Now, part of the reason this works for the seller is that for the university, it means you don't have to put any capital down. You're just paying a rate for electricity just like you do now. But for the seller or the project developer, they need capital to build their project. So they need to borrow that capital. In order to borrow it, they need a customer to show to a lender, hey, when we build this, we're going to be able to sell the electricity at this price to this customer. They've already agreed to do that. And so a lender views that very favorably because it makes the economics of the project a sure thing for them. They know they're going to get their money paid back because the project has a customer who's got a guaranteed price for their electricity. So that's how this whole thing works together in a way that works really well for project developers because it allows them to borrow low-cost capital, and it works for universities because it means they don't have to put up any capital of their own. Next slide. Working in a college or university, you already know this, but I'll repeat it anyway. We are all working in large, complex organizations, and it behooves us to make sure that we're talking to all of our stakeholders. With a renewable energy project, there are a lot of moving parts, which means it touches a lot of different functions within the university. So it's important when you're pursuing a large project like this to get those folks in the room early and often. And these are just some of the typical stakeholders that you would involve. Next slide. I'll skip through this one, but this is when we're going through our formal process, we would develop a formal profile like this to help nail down the exact preferences and criteria that a customer has for their renewables project. Next slide. You've already heard Chip and Sarah talk a little bit about their process for assessing on-site solar, so I'm going to skip this too. Suffice to say, there's a good method for doing this analytically to assess your on-site potential. Next slide. Expanding the lens a little bit and zooming out, so to speak, and looking rightly on campus first. A lot of people think first to look at their potential for on-site. What people often find when they look on-site is that they've got some good opportunity to do some good projects, usually solar. Sometimes the economics are compelling. That's a very state-to-state equation. But usually what they find is that they're only able to nibble away at their problem, which is to say that the availability of space on campus doesn't match the greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal that they have or their cost reduction goal that they have. So they have to look at a broader picture. And if you look at this map, you'll see the blue dots here are wind projects and the yellow are solar projects. It's a pretty crowded map. Most people don't have a map like this at their fingertips. So one of the main things we do is help to make sense of the national marketplace of projects for a given campus. Next slide. Then we look at specific projects after going through the customer's criteria and looking at the supply inventory across the country, and we choose projects that match up with those criteria of the customer, and we do a bunch of analysis. We analyze whether the project is going to generate the power that the developer says it's going to generate. We compare the prices in the market where that project is being developed into the future compared to what the school would be paying. And that's a critical part of our economic analysis that helps schools decide whether to pursue a project like this or not. And third, we look at the correlation between the market where an off-site project is located and the market where the university is located. Next slide. Briefly on this, and this is where people often have questions, but briefly, a PPA is, just as the name suggests, a power purchase agreement. It means you're agreeing on a price to purchase power. What you do with that power after you purchase it is up to you. One common way of finding a project with the best economics, which may be geographically remote from your campus, one way of dealing with that remoteness is that once you purchase the power, you then have the project owner resell that power on your behalf into the marketplace. And this was referred to earlier, I think, by Sarah as a contract for differences. This is a way of gaining both the financial and environmental benefits of renewable energy without conflicting with an existing energy supply. People are typically referring to this as what's called a financial PPA, which means that they do not have to schedule retail delivery of their power. And that can be, that's one of those lessons that I learned, that if I were to do our large-scale PPA over again, I would probably look at a financially settled PPA rather than one that required physical delivery. Next slide. This is just a diagram going through what I just mentioned, so I'm going to, I'll go to the next slide after this. And again. This is an example of a PPA price comparison. Chip showed you one as well. He showed you one that showed an escalator over time. And this is just to give you a sense that the green lines here are different PPA structures. One can be flat and one can be an escalator. The main difference, the main benefit usually of opting for an escalator is that you can tip the nose down a little bit so the savings are realized earlier on. Often that can trade off some of the long-term benefit, but this is just to give you a sense of there are a number of ways to structure the price in a PPA. Next, and then we're going to wrap and move to questions. There are a lot of terms in a PPA to negotiate. One of the important roles that we play as a company is that we help you understand those terms and we negotiate them for you. Next slide. And again, further detail on those terms and risks. And I think that concludes it. Next slide, I think, is just contact info. These are some of our customers, and the next slide should have my contact info. Sorry, we're bragging here. These are some of our accomplishments. And finally, there you go. So we've got, I think we still have at least 10 minutes or so for questions. So I'll turn it back to Michelle to field those questions.
Sure, thanks Chris, and thanks to all our presenters. The first questions are, I think, two together fairly quickly in case we run out of time, around PPAs. Can PPAs, can you use that for an installation on campus, or are they just for off-site installations? And if your utility doesn't allow for PPA, is there another workaround with a similar outcome if you have little to no capital to invest?
Good question, and I'll take that question unless others want to jump in. I'm assuming everyone's off mute now, so if others want to jump in, feel free. But yeah, the simple answer is a PPA is a contract structure that can be used for projects that are on-site or off-site. If you're in a state that regulates PPAs, typically what that means is that you can still usually do a PPA behind the meter on your campus, and you can also do a PPA out of your state that's structured as a contract for differences. The only states that I know of that have prohibitions against PPAs, what they're actually prohibiting is a PPA from an off-site project that's within your own state.
Okay, next question. I think Sarah alluded to this, and if she or you, Chris, could expand on it a little bit. How do institutions take advantage of federal tax credits when schools don't pay those taxes? How do you monetize that opportunity?
So at Cornell, we did that by partnering with a third-party developer. It's a developer that we signed the PPA with, and then because they are a private entity, then they can partner with tax equity investors and bring in that investment to their project company. I think there's a potential, though we haven't done it because it becomes quite complicated. I think many institutions, Cornell included, have what's called, at least here, UBIT, unrelated business income tax, and there are sort of fairly more complicated options to set up, like Soccer Corps, like that. But the most straightforward way that we found is party with a private entity.
Great, thank you. Another question, switching gears a little bit. I'm not sure if our friends at Cornell or Howard have done this, but I'm sure many schools are trying to consider some of these options. What are the best ways to use your endowment portfolio to invest in campus renewable energy projects?
Well, Chip, have you been able to do that?
No, we've stayed away from that one right now. I have heard of that, but right now we have stayed away from it.
Yeah, we've had some discussions about it with our, I guess talking to your endowment manager and the management committee would be the way to go. It hasn't been something, the investment opportunities presented by the projects we've done haven't been enticing to our endowment to date, but I think it is definitely a possibility.
I do want to add that I have seen endowments coupled with other project types, and where you had to prove that you could pay the money back in X amount of time. And so I would say any project where you can prove that it's going to be a benefit for you to own the project rather than go through a PPA vehicle and let somebody else own your project, it might make sense to do that. But you have to, in most cases I've heard about, you have to demonstrate that the money is going to be paid back in X amount of time with some profit, that kind of thing. And I've seen other energy projects financed that way.
And maybe Chris, you might be able to expand. Cornell is also a satisfied Altenex customer, and we've had some discussions about how that might impact accounting treatment, or there's some sort of arm's length requirements out there that people smarter than me would need to figure out.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Michelle, I think that's a really great question because I think it represents an area of untapped opportunity. Higher education has a big kitty of money as a sector that's invested very safely and very wisely, to advance the educational mission of higher education. And it's done in a way that is, let's say, very conventional and safe. One thing that's really nice about renewables that we talked a little bit about during the webinar is that it is also very safe, which is to say a project is going to produce a certain amount of energy, and if it has a contract to sell that energy, it's a very safe investment. However, it's very new. Most investors, period, let alone endowment managers, are not familiar with directly investing in renewable energy projects, so it hasn't really been done yet in higher ed. Endowments haven't been used to generate a return for the school while catalyzing the development of renewable energy. But it's a conversation that's very actively ongoing right now, and in fact, another allied organization is on a working group of another partner of Second Nature that's working on this very same question. So if people have questions on that and want to follow up with me on it, it's something that we're really excited about as an opportunity to both catalyze renewable energy, but also importantly to safeguard the financial resources that a university has in its endowment.
Great. Thank you, Chris, and thank you so much to all of our presenters and to our panelists today, to our participants for being with us today. We're going to wrap it up now, but just a reminder that we will post the slides and the recording of this in the coming days, and we'll make sure to include our panelist emails in those materials, so you can email any of us with any questions you have about this or other questions related to your climate action plans and sustainability goals. And we thank you all for your commitment and for your participation today. Thank you.